The diverse LGBTQI+ communities of New South Wales and in Australia have a proud history of solidarity. After the first Mardi Gras protest in 1978, which was met with police brutality and mass arrests, people who had not been arrested gathered outside the Darlinghurst police station to raise enough bail to release those held by police. I'm told that this was a significant organisational effort for a Sunday morning in pre-ATM 1978. During the 1990s, when queer people, particularly gay men and some trans women, were the subject of horrific violence, the dykes on bikes would patrol the streets and communicate by radio to keep people safe. During the worst years of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, lesbians contributed significantly to the HIV response here in New South Wales. When the stigma of HIV meant that some health workers were scared of gay men who they thought might be sick, lesbian nurses stepped up to support and care for gay patients, and many other lesbians provided care and support for their gay male friends. This solidarity is not just historical, it's proudly ongoing. When the federal Albanese government this year announced it wouldn't implement the Australian Bureau of Statistics' own recommendations to count LGBTQI+ people in the census, after community outrage, Prime Minister backflipped to announce that a question on sexual orientation would be included. This could have divided us, but it didn't. I was so proud to see lesbian, gay, bisexual and other queer people unwaveringly stand with trans, gender diverse and intersex people to demand that the census count all of us, not just some of us. That led to the Prime Minister conceding to include a question on gender identity. An appropriate question on innate variation of sex characteristics is still missing, and I don't think for a second that the people who are involved in this campaign feel that this is over until we are all counted. Earlier this year, when Cumberland Council egregiously attempted to ban a book about same-sex parents from its public library, local rainbow families were backed in, not just by same-sex parents, but by the entire LGBTQI+ community and our allies who signed and shared petitions, wrote letters and turned up to the council chambers in protest. And we won. This long-standing and ongoing solidarity is why today is both a day of great joy and a day of deep hurt for some LGBTQIA+ communities. The version of the bill we're considering today in the Legislative Council is not the equality bill as it was introduced by the member for Sydney last year. I acknowledge that he's in the chamber today. I understand that his personal views have not changed, that he understands these reforms are still important and that he will still be continuing to pursue them through other avenues. I thank the member for Sydney for his hard work drafting and advocating for these reforms. But for the people whose lives would have been directly and profoundly impacted by the provisions of the bill that were removed yesterday in the Legislative Assembly, it's understandable that you are feeling left behind. It's heartbreaking to support a bill that is called the Equality Bill, but does not deliver equality for everybody that it should. To that end, I indicate that the Greens will be moving amendments today so that the most important of these provisions can be properly considered and debated today. I hope that we can all join in celebrating what's being achieved today and acknowledge the profound and meaningful difference that the laws being changed today will have on some people's lives. I also hope that after celebrating, we'll knuckle back down together to finish the work that was started and actually deliver full equality for LGBTQI+ people in New South Wales, without exceptions. Those changes that are not being delivered today, but should and could, with the full support of the Minns Labor government in this term of the Parliament. People who are being left behind today need our collective and unwavering support to make that happen. So what will change if the bill as amended passes today? Trans and gender diverse people will be able to update their birth certificate without the need for violating and medically unnecessary surgery. This is historic and overdue reform that brings New South Wales up to speed with every other Australian jurisdiction. People will also be able to record their sex as non-binary, and the time to register a birth, if variations of sex characteristics make it difficult to determine an infant's sex, will be extended from 60 to 180 days. Family members will also be able to alter the record of sex of a trans or gender diverse child, parent or sibling as it appears on their own birth certificate. The impact of these reforms will be profound. A dear friend of mine who's non-binary told me this week that these provisions passing into law in New South Wales before Christmas are the best Christmas present they ever could have imagined. A trans woman who wrote to me shared that, quote, "In an increasingly violent transphobic society, it is a real and legitimate danger to be outed to everyone who sees male on my legal identification forms." Another said, quote, "Reproductive surgery for me could mean a hysterectomy with far-reaching effects on my health and my sex life. It's also an expensive procedure. Being able to change my gender marker will open up a lot of things for me, such as travel to countries that might be dangerous for a person who hasn't changed their gender. This bill won't hurt anyone else, but it will help thousands of trans people to be able to live their lives authentically without the need for invasive surgeries," end quote. In my work as a GP before my election to Parliament, I have been approached to be the second doctor required to perform an invasive medical examination to confirm that someone had undergone surgery. This was uncomfortable and distressing for me as a practitioner, and I can only imagine how uncomfortable and distressing this process is for trans and gender diverse people. My colleagues in the medical profession have also sounded the alarm about the onerous and unnecessary process to change gender on state documents in New South Wales. For example, I've spoken with a surgeon rightly concerned that patients are seeking surgeries which are sometimes medically high risk, not for medical or personal need, but purely to satisfy the requirements of the New South Wales Births, Deaths and Marriages Act. New South Wales is the only jurisdiction with such a requirement. There's been a lot of fear-mongering and disinformation circulating about what these changes will mean here in New South Wales. As someone who lives in Albury-Wodonga, I can confidently assure anyone who is concerned that the sky might fall in, that the sky has not fallen in Victoria. It's extremely disingenuous to see people opposing these changes under the pretense of the safety of women, when not only do their arguments fail to make any sense, but when these people never advocate for the safety of women except when it is an opportunity to promote hatred of trans people. In debate here and in the Legislative Assembly, examples cited of these risks are mostly not even Australian. If these supposed risks were happening in other Australian states and territories, you would expect that opponents of this bill to be jumping up and down to point this out. But they're not. All women, cisgender and transgender women, our safety is regularly threatened, and it's threatened by men. It's not threatened by this bill. Similarly, there's suddenly a lot of disingenuous support for the integrity of women's sport from people who've never cared about equal pay, prize money, or well-funded facilities for women's sport. The rhetoric around trans and gender diverse people today is a horrifying echo of the way that gay, lesbian, and other queer people were spoken about decades ago as mentally unwell, perverted or dangerous. The majority of the Parliament and the majority of the public in New South Wales now clearly understand that this was wrong. And I'm confident that a future reader of this week's parliamentary Hansard record will be horrified by that kind of language being used now. While there are now several members of Parliament across both houses and across the political spectrum of openly diverse sexual orientations, no representative in this Parliament identifies as trans or gender diverse. And I think that speaks volumes to the level of ongoing stigma and marginalisation trans and gender diverse people face across New South Wales. Birth certificate reform will not alone fix this, but it's a very important step. There are other important provisions in this bill that I hope and expect will pass today, following the compromise that was reached with the Minns Labor government. Offences for living off the earnings of a sex worker will be repealed, enabling sex workers to care for adult family members. Decisions about where to accommodate a child under state protection will have to consider an appropriate placement for their gender identity or variations in sex characteristics, as currently is the case with sexuality and religion. Children who have had their gender-affirming care or any other special medical treatment approved by the family court will not also have to go through NCAT for approval. Threats to out a person's LGBTIQA+ status or sex work history will be recognised as abuse. Aggravated sentencing for crimes motivated by hate will be extended to hate for trans and intersex people. Outdated and stigmatising language used to describe people living with HIV or AIDS will be appropriately updated. And the Mental Health Act will make it clear that gender identity and gender expression are not a mental illness and are not reasons to detain someone. There will also be a pathway for children born from overseas commercial surrogacy arrangements to have their parents recognised. I understand that many people have valid concerns about commercial surrogacy, and particularly overseas commercial surrogacy, that may risk the exploitation of women if it's not appropriately regulated. I also know that many people, including some of my closest friends, wish that they could access appropriately regulated commercial surrogacy here and be with their loved ones during precious moments for their family, not overseas. Someone who wrote to me said, quote, "I dream of starting a rainbow family, but the road to doing it looks legally torturous and forbiddingly expensive. This bill is the first step towards softening a harshly paternalistic social norm that prevents loving people from becoming parents," end quote. I look forward to considered debate on this matter in future. However, the provisions in the bill before us today provide a pathway for children already living here in New South Wales with loving parents who were born from overseas commercial surrogacy to have their parents recognised. And this is an important provision for the well-being of these children and families. Since my election as an Upper House MP, I've had the joy and privilege of travelling around the state to speak with LGBTQI+ communities and our allies across the state. From events and groups as diverse as Parramatta Pride, Out Loud and Proud Port Macquarie, the Orange Rainbow Festival, the Wagga Mardi Gras, Queer Family in the Northern Rivers, the Broken Hill-based Rainbow Shoelace Project and Tamworth Pride. In connecting with these communities, they've reiterated how critical these reforms are, in particular the changes to the Births, Deaths and Marriages Act, but also the now removed changes to the Anti-Discrimination Act, as well as non-legislative work that the New South Wales Government must continue to progress, as well as access to gender-affirming care. I'm proud to represent a party that can be counted on to vote for equality. Every MP, every vote, every time. And that works both inside and outside of the Parliament to drive progressive change. I look forward to continuing to work with LGBTQIA+ communities and our allies towards full equality today and every day.